Hi everyone, and welcome to a walkthrough of the MYOB Greentree Single Touch Payroll, or STP. Okay, so what am I going to go through in this recording? Going to go through the installation, the setup and configuration in Greentree itself, the processing, and I'll including the end of year, feedback and questions, just how we're going to go about that. And lastly, I put it on this slide, just a reminder that what I'm going to cover is shown to you in the 2018.1.0 release. This is the minimum requirement for STP and what you're about to see. Okay, so first up, the installation. So we need to install an SSL certificate. This must be done on the server where Greentree resides. Do not do this on a local machine. It needs to be done on the server. This installation needs to be done as the administrator or as administrator privileges. So the right click run as administrator when you're doing the install. To get this SSL certificate, go to the Greentree FTP packages folder. There's an MYOB certificates folder. Take the zip file that's sitting in there. Take that zip file, take it out, unzip it. You'll see a certificate in there. Place that certificate in the bin64 folder on your server. I'll show you what all that means just in a second, but it's pretty straightforward. Go to your bin64 folder, find an MYOB Greentree Production Certificate installer, run that installer, only takes a couple of seconds, and you will get a message, certificate successfully installed if you have run it as the administrator. We've seen a couple of error messages come up so far. You may get one that says certificate is already installed, or you might get a permissions issue. If you want to, there are a number of ways you can check to see that the certificate is installed, either in your browser settings or in the Microsoft Management Console. Lastly, this only needs to be done once. If, and that's a big if you move servers, in Greentree to another server, you will need to reinstall the certificate. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so what does this look like? Here I am in my bin64 folder. Here is the file that you'll see here, this MYOB Greentree Production Certificate Installer. And here's my certificate that I've taken from FTP, unzipped it, and just placed it in that bin64 folder. I just run this installer, and I'll get this error message because I've already installed it on my system. But that's all you need to do. Only takes a couple of seconds. The message should come up and say the certificate successfully installed. Next, I would like to talk through the setup and configuration within Greentree itself. Several things to cover. Again, just a reminder, you need to be on the 2018.1.0 release as a minimum. We need to check in the country maintenance that the ISO 3166 has been selected correctly. We'll go through the HR module control payments lodgements tab just to go through that. Employees, transaction types, and I'll touch on tax agents and what's involved for the setup for that. So in Greentree itself, first of all, in the country maintenance. So this is the field here. In the country maintenance, for Australia, the ISO 3166 code. Please just check that that is set. we found that in some of the demo systems that wasn't selected. So please just make sure that's selected. In the HR module control. So into the HR module control, within payroll, and there's a lodgements tab. This is your notification email address, so please type that in there. This is where your emails will come back to you when you are doing your submitting, which we'll come on to shortly. Lodgement pays to STP from this date. So from this date, this is applying when you'll be able to submit your lodgements to the ATO. Enter the required date there. Bear in mind that the requirement is from the 1st of July 2018. When you enter that date, you then need to get this software identification number. When you've got your software identification number, you need to follow these instructions here. To submit those documents to the ATO, users must authorize MYOB to act on their behalf. Therefore, you need to call the ATO on that number or use your ATO business portal and report that number to them. From there, you're then ready to begin. Employees. So there's been some changes in the employees, both in setup and just around validation that the ATO is now requiring. So here's just a test employee that I've set up. You'll now notice the message, this is only a warning. Some employee details are still required for STP. This information is required that's outlined here. And please note that what's missing off this list, which will be added, is the email address. So please make sure that you enter the email address as well as these details that are required here. Bear in mind, this is only a warning, but the ATO will not accept it without these records, so you have been warned. On the tax configuration tab here, because the STP is using a lot of the existing functionality, oops, sorry, wrong one. On the payment summary, you still have this option here of do not print. If you select an employee to do not print, they will not be selected for STP processing. Whatever reason that may be, that you're not submitting that employee, you can still select that do not print. That was the same with the payment summary configuration. So that's still the same. Down here, include in the next submission for ATO. This only applies for new employees once you've started using STP. Existing employees are fine. Okay, transaction types. When you come into the transactions types now, you'll notice there's now an STP tab at the end there. I'm just going to call up transaction type here just to demonstrate this. You'll notice I've brought alongside the payment summary configuration screen as well. In the past, you'd set up your transaction types and then have to go and maintain your payment summary configuration separately. Now what we've done is, because STP is effectively replacing the payment summaries, with the tab here, we're aiming for it to be more of a seamless process. So when I'm setting up any transaction types or maintaining them, I can allocate them here at the same time. The reason I brought the screen up here is in this payment summary configuration. You'll notice 202 TS is there in the lump sum, and the lump sum's there. So you can still go and use that payment summary configuration, but there's no need to. You can do it all in here. And what you also find now is we've added some extra validation into this transaction types. So if I just call one up here from the beginning, it's not there. I'm just going to do one of those simple exercises of changing the description as an example, but the same process applies if it was a new one that I was setting up. I save. I'm now getting this error message. This transaction type is not configured. Do you wish to continue? So again, this is just acting as a warning message. It's not preventing me from continuing. So if this transaction type is to be reported to the ATO, you need to bear that in mind. Allowances. On the allowances, under STP, you've got this bit here that you now need to complete. So we would recommend that you go and review all these allowances before you do your first submission. Allowances need to fall into one of these categories, so please review these. The last thing I wanted to cover off here is tax agents. I'll cover a bit more on tax agents in the processing, but in the System Options tab, you'll also notice there's an STP. In here, select that, and you'll be need to require to enter these bits of information. I'll show you the second bit of the tax agent setup as part of the processing exercise. In the next section, I'm going to talk about processing. The payroll processes and the payment run are the same as they currently are. Create lodgements is based on the date in the HR module control that we covered earlier. I'll recap on that when we actually come to process the lodgements. The submitting of the file to the ATO goes through a task queue. Okay, when you come to see the submitting process, there's some rules around how the submitting process works. So the lodgement file is created. The task queue sends the file, or attempts to send the file, every minute for the first 15 minutes. This then changes to every 5 minutes for the first hour. This then changes to every 15 minutes for the next 3 hours. This then changes to every hour from the 5th and subsequent hours onwards. After 24 hours, if not successful, it sends an email to the default notification address. So that's the notification address you saw in the HR module control earlier on, alerting you to that fact. From our EAP on this STP process, polling time suggested that you have to wait at least 4 minutes before any kind of response from the ATO. This is regardless of the number of employees in the pay run. So don't go expecting, oh, there's only 2 people. It should take no time at all. The ATO have advised us that an acceptable maximum time of up to 72 hours. So therefore, if you submitted it, ATO are saying don't go asking where it is if you haven't heard anything back within that 72 hours. So therefore, anything with a submitted status, and you'll see that shortly, of over 72 hours then needs to be investigated. If it's within that 72 hours, ATO are reporting, please do not ask us. Last 2 points on processing I'll cover off: adjustments and end of year processing, and tax agents. So the process in Greentree for submitting the lodgements to the ATO, I have processed to pay. That, as indicated earlier, that process hasn't changed. So I've come into my create payments. I actually created the payment here just to show you. Couple of employees getting paid there. Then you'll notice this create lodgement button appears. Now this Create Lodgement button appears based on the date of my payment. So it's looking at the HR module control, it's looking at this date that's here. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is, as long as this date here is after the date that's on my HR module control, then it wants to process my lodgements and that button appears. So what we found is what's caught a couple of people out, that button will not appear if that date is before the date on my HR module control. So I've created my payment, create lodgement, which then puts you into the screen here. There's the page that's want to process, and there's my payment log. There's my declaration. You'll notice there that it's pulled through that email address as a default. You can change it here if you need to. Ticking that, I can preview my file if I like. What that preview does, it puts it just into Excel. Otherwise, I'm ready to submit. Clicking on that submission puts it in the queue and opens this lodgement screen. So this is now processing those lodgements. So this is then sending the file to the ATO on the rules that I indicated on the PowerPoint slide on the timings. So this will sit there with a status of submitted, changed to successful. Once it's been submitted to the ATO, you will then get an email notification based on that date. I can look at the successful ones there. There's one that's gone through that are by default hidden there. If you want to check now, all it's doing is just resubmitting those through. So it's for the impatient people that are just checking and resubmitting those lodgements through. I can review it. I can resubmit it if it needs to be resubmitted. You'll see that once grayed out. I can output the log files if requested to. Or I can click on the support details. So when you click on the support details, this is presenting me with the details of the record that's been sent through to the ATO. So this is what may be requested for any troubleshooting, support logging where it needs to be investigated further. So the way we've done this is you can then copy and paste that out. You will notice that those tasks are sitting there in my print in task queue waiting to be going out. Okay, so just to cover the tax agent's setup and processing, as it's a little bit different, but also to point out a few of the things that need to be completed. So in the HR system options, touched on this earlier, but there's the STP tab. So if you set that to true, you need to fill in these requirements, which is your agent ABM and your agent number. So I've completed those accordingly. Then what you'll notice, there's a change in the HR module control in terms of this section down here. Now, when I made those changes and entered the agent details, there's a message that appears to say, do you want to set these details in the HR module control? Effectively, that turns this on. Otherwise, you need to come in here and set that option to true. I went yes, and it set that option there for me. I can fill in my employee declared by as a default or leave that blank. You'll see the effect of that in a second. So let's set that on. Then when I come in to do my lodgement process, so again, here's one I created earlier after I made that change in my setup to be a tax agent. I've processed this pay, just to show that there's one there. Create my lodgement. Now you notice this has changed slightly from the other screen. While the STP lodgement is the same, you notice this declaration is different because this is what is now required from a tax agent point of view. That's the declaration. I'm doing that, and there's my default that would come through from my HR module control if I put that in. So there's my declaration that I'm filling in and the date, and then I would submit it as I have done with the other lodgement process. So that's the difference with the tax agent that you need to set up. Okay, next I want to cover update lodgements and end of year processing. So under HR, Payroll, Other Functions, there's an option here called STP Update Lodgement. Now generally speaking, any changes or adjustments that are done to people's pay will be taken care of in the next STP lodgement that is done for an employee. So what this update lodgement screen here does, it does two things. I can do my end of year processing, plus also I can send updates to the ATO. So this is more around where people's addresses or details have changed, or maybe there's an adjustment to their payroll or their pay that won't be picked up in the next lodgements that's sent to the ATO. So in other words, when I come in here, I select my year, search now, so I can choose it at an individual employee level. Just select it and create the lodgement, and it goes through the process that I've shown earlier. If I'm doing the final for the year, I simply select that box there. You'll notice that all employees are selected and then create that. That is then flagging them as their final for the year processing. Lastly, I would just like to cover off a feedback/question section. So first of all, the release notes. So there are release notes for single touch payroll. These are in Campus, and if you look in the 2018.1.0 section of the release notes within Campus, you'll see that it covers in detail the STP in there. Furthermore, if you have any questions, then please feel free to email me on the email address you see there, and I can certainly follow up and get back to you. If it's of useful, I can put out some discussion posts as well, so others can see. Thank you for your time.